The hair cortisol is reflective, and at least as of right now, preliminarily, it looks like our data suggests that it's fairly reflective of milk production, and it's fairly reflective of some of the early reproductive outcomes.
Welcome to the Rumination Podcast, presented by Jefo Nutrition. Hi, I'm your host, Gwyn. Today's discussion will focus on recent research in the area of factors related to long-term stress in dairy cattle and how this can impact milk yield and reproductive outcomes. And with me today to discuss this research is Dr. Laura Hernandez, professor of lactation physiology, affiliate professor of obstetrics and gynecology, and the vice chair of research and teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Hernandez grew up in El Paso, Texas, completed her BSc and MSc at New Mexico State University and her PhD at the University of Arizona with Dr. Robert Collier. After a 3-year postdoc at the University of Cincinnati, where she researched mammary gland development, lactation, and breast cancer, Dr. Hernandez moved to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she continues her research, teaching, and mentoring of students in the area of lactation biology. Laura has received several awards during her career, including the Arthur J. and Ellen A. Maurer Extra Mile Award, the 2022 ADSA Zoetis Physiology Award, and in 2017 was the ADSA's Foundation Scholar Award in Production. Most recently, Laura has been selected by the ADSA as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dairy Science, and so congratulations on that new editorial role, Dr. Hernandez.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. So reading recently, your lab collaborated in a recent research poster and abstract at the 2025 ADSA conference related to the factors related to long-term stress in dairy cattle and the impact of that stress on milk yield and reproductive outcomes. Now at Jefo, we've been looking at stressors across species, in particular in dairy cows, working to kind of expand the conversation a bit beyond the typical heat stress discussion. I was wondering if you could give our audience an overview of this study and why it's important, how the study was designed, and some of the outcomes.
Sure. This was a collaboration and an ongoing collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Milo Wiltbank, who's a reproductive physiologist here at UW. We had a shared scientist who's now a professor at the vet school at the University of Florida, Pedro Monteiro. He was the first author on the abstract. And when he was here, he was working with both of us, and he got interested in some of the things surrounding stress during the transition period due to collaborations with my lab. He's traditionally a reproductive physiologist, and he developed this question about how this might impact return to cyclicity and timing of parturition. His main complaint was in our projects, we could never figure out when the cows would calve. So they'd be sampling forever and ever and ever. And then finally the cow would calve early or late, of course. And so he was like, there's got to be a way we can figure this out. And it also might be really critical to how successfully a cow comes back into cyclicity, or what might happen with reproductive diseases, knowing that there's all these losses that occur that are due to a variety of problems in the first 60 days postpartum. These like reasons they leave the herd, for, whether it's a DA or hypocalcemia or mastitis or whatever it might be. So he had this thought that we were thinking that cortisol might be driving some of these responses, both the timing of calving, and of course we know that cortisol is a major stress regulator of all things, and it changes all the time in relation to a variety of stresses. So he had read this paper, and I believe it was beef cattle, and they had shown that you could measure cortisol in the hair. And really the hair cortisol is reflective that day for about 2 weeks-ish prior to the actual date you took the hair sample. Because the cortisol deposits in the hair and the hair doesn't go away. And so like it grows and then you shave it off and you can do this measurement via RIA or ELISA of the cortisol. And so we got to thinking, like, maybe this was a better way to do this, because you take it from the urine, you take it from the blood, you take it from the feces. You're stressing the animal out, every time you stick a needle in them to take blood. And so we thought this might be better. And then, particularly in a transition animal, if you shaved the hair sometime prepartum, say estimated 2 weeks, and then you take the sample afterwards, you would know the amount of time exactly from which your last sample was to that day. So a couple of days postpartum, it would tell you what their stress was before calving. And then you could extrapolate some of that information, maybe what might be happening in that parturition period, or that transition period, that would be reflective of a disease state or whatever, what have you. But our primary interests were disease states, and then, of course, like their ability to breed and their return to cyclicity was kind of the big marker. But we wanted to prove that this was something you could do large scale. So he enrolled 38 farms in the state of Wisconsin. And that's what that abstract was from. So we have quite a lot of data that is now being processed by mine and Milo's new graduate student. And he took samples both in the summer and in the winter on the same farm, so that he could preclude the environmental stress situation, like that wasn't the reason. And so we have that, and we have all their backups. So we know, like, if they had mastitis and all of this information. And so we're working right now to assess that, how it reflects on their milk production. We also know the kind of farm they are. So we know the size of the farm, what their milking setup was, how they house their animals prepartum, what
Lots,
their
lots of data.
voluntary waiting period, like all of those things, how they sink their cows. And so we've been trying to compile all of that together. And at least as of right now, preliminarily, it looks like our data suggests that it's fairly reflective of milk production, and it's fairly reflective of some of the early reproductive outcomes. And so this is at a first pass on the data, and that it's highly correlative. And we have, I believe, about 100 animals per farm. So we have a lot of animals. And so we're sifting through all of this, and hoping that it's going to reveal something on, let's say, performance of a farm per se. Our follow-up project, which is hopefully going to be starting this fall, is we're going to intervene on a smaller study, using these methods, and with a nutritional strategy that we know has been shown to impact immune or stress level, and has done so in the literature before. And we're specifically in this case going to be looking at pregnancy loss, and some of the really selective reproductive measurements, and kind of what's happening with cortisol signaling. And so that is our main goal, is that we can use this as a marker. And then if farms were to do this, they could, take hair samples, and we could run cortisol, and it would give them an indication of how stressed their herd might be. So we hope to develop some thresholds that would allow farms to be able to extrapolate the data, because I'm assuming things like stocking rate or feed quality, all of these kinds of things might be involved in changing the stress of a herd, an animal situation. And so that's what our goal is. And we're pretty close to having a paper ready where we did the pilot that shows that the 14 days um, are really indicative in the change of cortisol, that if you measure a hair sample on this day, 14 days later really mirrors that. And we've done this through a really direct way of targeting increased cortisol concentrations. So we did a really intense physiological study to show, where do you get peak cortisol if you give a stimulator of cortisol in the hair. And we have all the blood and urine data to show that. so that we were able to definitively know when to be taking hair samples on a larger scale.
So you can kind of get rid of the confounding factors of the
Yep.
length of the hair and the concentration, right?
Yeah.
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 And I think in this poster, you had demonstrated, if we can just uh, take out some of the key points, low stress, low cortisol versus high,
Mm-hmm.
you were able to see a production performance
Yep.
difference, wasn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be from a practical standpoint that if our data continues to go in the way that it has been, that if a farm wanted us to come, that this is something that could be done by nutritionists or nutrition groups or veterinarian groups, that if they wanted to know what it looked like, say in the prepartum period, they could take a hair sample when they dried cows off, and then maybe, like, depending on what their dry off protocol was, like 3 weeks later, get another hair sample. That could be run and they would have a good idea of what's happening. Or if they wanted to do it in a post fresh cow, like say 10 days postpartum, they could really take a look at, what some of these pen changes might look like. If they did it in a new facility, or if they were having problems, like, is it due to stress? What's the stress level? How might that look on a threshold if we can develop one? Um, it would be a really easy way to do so without bleeding a cow. All you have to do is shave the tail head. Um, and it's just a regular shaving. It's not like a genetic test where you have to pull the hair out. It's just shaving, and then analyzing the sample. And so that is our hope, is where you could do that and have that data aligned with herd backup, so you would know kind of where your threshold levels are and what your disease states are and your reproductive components are and how your milk production's faring. And if you wanted to make a change, you would know what it looked like before and after, which I think is always useful information for producers to know. I imagine I'm not a nutritionist and I am not one of their advisors, but when they are like, why is this not working? I'm still seeing these problems. Is this working? Because they want things to work quickly. Um, it's a way to give them information to make good decisions for their farm.
No, 100%. I mean, often we're weighing decisions and the economic cost or investment required.
Right.
And so inherently, we may understand that certain periods of lactation or management practices have a different level of applied stress or stressors, right?
Right.
Calving, regrouping, the whole process, mixing groups, but we don't know what that costs us.
Right.
And,
Right.
some association of a simple cortisol test with a number of studies that support, say, milk loss or impacts on reproduction will reestablish or reinforce the need to perhaps change some management and
Mm-hmm.
practices. Yeah, that's really cool. Fascinating.
And I think that's my hope. And, I'm a very basic scientist, but all the things I root my science in are providing information to make good decisions that work the very best for a particular farm within the means of their ability to do things. And I think that's why we're here, is to help them. And so we try to really make our work as translational as possible.
No, we really appreciate that. I think it's really important. So, with that in mind, I want to thank you. Thank you today for your time to share this research. We look forward to follow up and catching up further as the research and the data progresses and becomes further available in the public forum through published formats. So that's great. So thank you very much. And I want to thank our listening audience for joining us today. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Rumination podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or other platforms. And feel free to visit us at jefo.ca for more information about Jefo and our nutrition solutions. This podcast was brought to you by Jefo Nutrition, precision nutrition for a growing world. And have a great day.